Hello, YouTube. I'm bringing you a live hangout on air panel discussion today on the Donald Trump presidency and a few other topics. We're going to talk about medical marijuana, the Johnson campaign, the idea of a guaranteed national income, and anything else that comes up. So, James, why don't you get the ball rolling here? What do you think about Donald Trump?
Donald Trump is a really interesting guy. He ran on a lot of anger, but also a lot of what I think of as third-party platforms with, his opposition to foreign interventionism. A lot of talk about how, he's a billionaire. He does not need outside money to influence his presidency. He's independently wealthy, but on the other hand, providing America with this model of a strongman president who's going to fix all the problems single-handedly. On the whole, I don't see him as a positive, but there are certain strains of his platform that if he follows through with, I can see a certain benefit to him. And that's not even addressing any of the misogyny or, racist kind of things that he was proselytizing.
There's been a trend throughout the 20th century, which is the rise of the Imperial Presidency. And we saw this certainly with Obama, with his extrajudicial killing of an American. Benjamin, Wirtz back. We're live here, Benjamin. We're just talking about Donald Trump right now.
How fun.
So I was saying that we've seen in the 20th century the rise of the Imperial Presidency. The president has had more power. He's been starting wars on his own. Traditionally,
with Wilson, I'd say.
Wilson, yeah, Wilson. Terrible president, in my opinion, and definitely. Well, you had the rise of Wilsonian imperialism, right? The idea that the world has to be made safe for democracy, that you have to have these foreign interventions.
Yeah.
Well, I would even say that a lot of that goes back to Theodore Roosevelt, where
I was thinking that too. He was the start of the progressive movement.
Well, not only that, he was also very big on the nobility of war and combat and all of that kind of thing, and where he was very eager to get the United States involved in the Spanish-American War, because that was it was noble to be in combat, go through combat. It would teach you, so many lessons about yourself and the world and this, that, and the other thing. And so he was the first person who really spoke out against John Quincy Adams's
and not entangling alliances.
Warning about not trying to seek foreign monsters to slay.
Yeah.
And so I lay a lot of our modern interventionism on the feet of Theodore Roosevelt, even though President Wilson was not a very good person to step back from that.
So is Trump going to continue with this trend of the imperial presidency, of having more power in the hands of the executive, or do you think that
well, I think that's what his supporters want.
I agree. A lot of his rhetoric was about, let's get the jobs back. Let's do this and that and the other thing. And I think he firmly believes that, what we need is a strongman president to pull back a lot of the other wrongs that are happening within our society and our republic. And, me personally, I think that's a very short-sighted approach to it. But yes, I believe that he thinks that's the best way forward.
Yeah.
Just came out recently that Trump is no longer going to be repealing Obamacare. What do you guys think about Obamacare? What do you think about Trump's immediate reversal on the issue after winning the presidency?
I'm not surprised. He's been all over the place on everything, pretty much.
Yeah, I'm not entirely surprised either. He never had a very cogent view on much of anything, and therefore I'm really not surprised that a lot of the things that he was campaigning on are starting to get turned around, and all of a sudden he's saying, "Oh, what, ban Muslims? What are you talking about?"
Yeah. For me, there was a time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Asked about Obamacare. For a while, I did have to actually pay that in tax because I couldn't afford full insurance, but I was at like that in between stage where I didn't qualify for the exemption either. So I was like.
So did you end up you got penalized or you just had insurance? Or?
I got penalized for like a couple months that it was or whatever.
Here in Canada, we've got universal healthcare, socialized medicine. So completely different system, which I'm not really too in favor of, but it's pretty popular in Canada anyway. Most people seem to support the idea.
But don't they say there's like long lines too?
There is some waiting for sure. To see a specialist, you can wait months, or I mean, if you go to the hospital, you'll wait. Depending, obviously, I mean, they are going to triage right in the most important cases, like any hospital will. So it all depends, I guess.
I do have a cousin in Austria who several years ago, it's probably 5 or 6 years ago, he was in a really bad auto accident. He was driving just a little bitty car, and a vacationing couple who happened to be a little bit intoxicated managed to run into him head on, and he had to be extricated by the first responders. And the steering wheel to the back of the seat, he was pinned between those two. It's about 6 inches apart. He had a lot of broken bones, and the socialized medicine in Austria, it's good, but it's not great. So a lot of the surgeries that he needed, and a lot of the specialists that he needed to see, he did have to make an appointment, wait at the back of the line, and he doesn't quite walk right today. And so even though I'm a libertarian, I don't necessarily condone government running of things. I can understand the argument for universal health care, but that's one anecdote that goes with a lot of the things that I've heard in the past where it's not ideal, and it doesn't always work ideally either.
To go somewhere else, that's another part of the problem.
That could be something. He didn't have the option. He didn't have any outside insurance to get fast tracked to any specialists or anything like that. That might be an option that would improve a socialized medicine.
There's a lot of criticisms directed towards the American healthcare system, but at the same time, there is a very high standard of care. So whatever the problems or disadvantages of the way the American system is set up, I think that overall the standard of care is very high, that they deliver high quality treatment.
There is some dissent to that, where, you know, people will say that, oh, you know, it depends on your income, what kind of insurance you have. And I would say to some extent that's true. But if you look at healthcare costs as a percent of GDP in the United States, it is just runaway, out of control. It is so incredibly high. And
Yes.
I think when we look at socialized medicine as a solution to everything, we also need to, we become blind to, you know, what is it that drives these kind of costs?
Yeah.
And a lot of it is due to defensive medicine, where doctors are so afraid to be wrong about something and get sued for it that they run 16 tests that they didn't have to run.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're like getting paid for it themselves. Like they're kind of, yeah, like they have, yeah.
That, you know what, that could be a part of it too, where, you know, they have a definite interest to run these extra tests because they know they're going to get paid X amount of dollars to do this, and it only costs them, you know, Y amount of dollars, and they make a profit to it. So, you know, that's certainly another avenue that needs to be investigated. But part two of why I think healthcare costs are so expensive is, you know, prescriptions. You know, we talk about big pharma. Why are drugs so expensive here and so cheap elsewhere? You know, the best argument I've heard of that came from The Economist magazine, where, you know, they were basically saying that the United States, more than any other rich, Western country, you know, was helping to subsidize cheap availability of drugs in other countries. And that made me scratch my head and say, well, you know, why aren't they more available elsewhere? And also, why aren't they cheaper here? I mean, it just seemed like a little bit of cognitive dissonance for me on that one.
Well, one of the things that drives up the price of prescription medicine in America, and it's a lot cheaper in Canada usually.
Yes,
When I see comparisons.
it is.
But well, one of the main reasons why drugs can be so expensive in America is the patent system, and
Yeah.
proponents of it will say, well, the drug companies need to be able to charge this much money to recoup the $1 billion they spent developing the drug.
Yep.
But what it really does is shut out other competition that could drive the price down.
Yeah, and that gets into a really big debate about, you know, copyright law and all of those kind of things. That's not a debate that I'm very good on, because in theory I really like copyright law. If you have an idea that you've come up with, I think you should be able to profit from it. But on the other hand, you know, I don't have a good idea of, you know, where do you draw the line where that's abused. And I think pharmaceutical companies are a good example of where potentially that's something that could be abused. But again, that's hard to prove, because these drugs do cost a buttload of money to develop. And how do you balance the ability for these companies to recoup their costs?
And
with...
to a degree, these patents can also retard innovation, because while it's under the patent, no other company can produce it and sell it, right? That's the whole point.
Right.
So they're not also, these other companies aren't trying to improve it because they're not working with it, right? You know, once the patent expires and they start selling it, then they might work to build on it, make it better, make it safer. But while it's under the purview of only one company, they won't be working on it. Now, the Republicans have control now of the House, the Senate, and the presidency. How do you think this is going to affect the political scene over the next two or 6 years? What do you think is going to happen as a result of that?
Maybe it's hard to say. Although the assumption would be there'd be like less checks because they agree, but also I'm not sure.
I would say that depends a lot on Donald Trump. I know Trump is giving Republicans a lot of heartburn. And it's going to depend on, whether he decides to moderate more towards a very orthodox Republican opinion or whether he wants to be a maverick. I think as it stands right now, Republicans are going to be very, very wary of supporting him and fighting in the trenches with him on anything that he wants to do. If he moderates back towards Republican orthodoxy, which I think a lot of the signs point towards, the fact that he might, then I think they're going to be much more willing to give him a much more definite mandate over legislation in the coming years.
But here's one thing. If you look at some of the people they're talking about are probably going to be in his cabinet, they're all like the insider types that they said that were fighting against him. So it's like,
yeah, and I think that points. That's one of the things that points towards maybe he might moderate. I see that his proposed ban on Muslims has kind of disappeared from his website. He's, like you said, picking a lot of these insiders. I don't know. He might tack towards the middle like any other politician, and then he's going to become a regular Republican, which is not something I normally savor, but compared to what he was talking about in his campaign, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of hope he does.
So what's the Trump foreign policy going to be like, or what can we guess about what the Trump foreign policy is? Is he going to be another Obama, another Bush? Is he going to be aggressive, or is he going to scale down American operations overseas?
that's another thing that he seems to have conflicting things he said on.
I'm going to say he is a businessman, has a good business understanding of a lot of the places which concern the U.S., but in a business context. In a really geopolitical context, I don't think he really has a good understanding of what that's going to take. Having said that, I do hope he enacts a lot of his rhetoric about scaling back our interventionism.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, but then he had the comments about like targeting the families of terrorists and stuff like that. So
I think if there's an area where he might actually be really aggressive overseas, it might be the idea that he's going to, really aggressively pursue ISIS.
Mm-hmm.
And he might limit it to that. I think that's even politically a really tough thing to do, is to say, you know what, we're not going to go after ISIS because it's not in our interests. I think it's quite another thing to say, I don't want to do another Iraq. I don't want to do another Afghanistan. I don't want to do another Syria. I don't want to do another Libya, because that backfires on us. I think that's not going to be a terribly hard agenda to get through and say, let's be a little bit more reserved. But when it comes to ISIS, I think if he wants to be politically effective, he's gonna have to maintain a pretty hard line against ISIS.
I saw a meme on Facebook, and it said, "Congratulations, marijuana, on winning more states than Hillary Clinton."
Yes,
In Canada, the government has stated they are going to legalize marijuana for recreational use, presumably throughout the country. That hasn't gone through yet, but I think it's supposed to happen pretty soon. What do you think about? There were I don't know the exact numbers, but a few states did vote to legalize for recreational use. What do you think about the legalization of marijuana? Is this a good decision?
Well, I'm for it mostly because of the fact that we've got too many of these people in jail for crimes that are like non-violent, and they're in there often for a long time. So it clogs up for when we have real violent criminals that need to get in there. So that's what really contributes to prison overcrowding.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with that. On a very philosophical level. And also, having been a former marijuana user myself, I haven't used in many, many years, but just when I smoked marijuana, I was too fucking lazy to commit any real crimes. So, the idea that a plant that really doesn't do any harm aside from itself is illegal, I don't get it. Putting people in jail for it, I don't get it. And if you want to expand that to the drug war in general,
yeah,
if you want to consume some kind of substance that maybe isn't very good for you, but if you want to do it, go ahead. None of my fucking business. If you happen to trespass upon somebody else's rights, whether or not you're on that drug, you're liable for it. But go ahead and do it. Make pot legal. I don't care. If you want to smoke pot, do it. If you don't.
I think there is some merit to the argument that says you shouldn't smoke pot, right? It's you're smoking something, so that's maybe bad for your lungs, and it does inebriate you, like you say, saps your motivation. But I think it's quite the stretch to go from saying, you shouldn't do something, which may or may not be true, to saying that the government should force you not to do it, right? So John Stuart Mill had the idea of the harm principle, which is that the only time that the community can exercise power over a member of the community is if he's going to be doing harm to somebody else, right? So if somebody's committing robberies or they're assaulting people, then you do have the right to step in, be it the police or whoever. But if the only person you're going to hurt is yourself, I don't see that it's a good idea for the government to step in that case. There's a lot of behavior that people may choose to do that from one person's perspective might be harmful, be it inadequate diet or binge drinking alcohol or whatever, but I think it's really up to the individual to decide about their own personal life choices, because they're the one most directly affected, and they're the one that can really weigh the pros and cons. Like, there's sort of a war on soda going on now. Everybody's saying we should tax this or whatever. It's bad for you. But who's to say the satisfaction? I don't drink soda, right? But who's to say the satisfaction a man gets from a Pepsi is not worth whatever, deleterious effects it might have on your health, right? Who's to make that decision?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they tried that in New York. It kind of backfired.
with the big gulp. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's within libertarian circles, that is still brought up over and over and over again. And, for me, I agree with the Libertarian Party line that, do unto yourself whatever you want to. Don't tread on anybody else's rights. That's really what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a proposal in Canada recently, and actually my province, Ontario, the most populous province, also the world's largest sub-sovereign debtor, even worse than California. Ontario is just massively in debt, hundreds of billions of dollars, more than any state, more than anywhere
surprised,
except
actually.
another country. Yeah, yeah. And California's got like 2 or 3 times our population of Ontario, but the government here just spends money like crazy. So they're doing a pilot program to test this idea of a guaranteed minimum income. So I'm not sure on all the details. The figure $1,300 was thrown around, and then some people are suggesting that if you're making minimum wage, you might get supplemented. Even if you're over 1,300, you would get like another 600 or another 1,300 or something. What do you think about this idea of a guaranteed minimum income?
Boy, there's some strains of libertarianism which, actually agree with this, where, if you want to take control of the resources and, distribute the profits equally, and then let everybody, make their income over that. I get that. I do kind of have a problem with, people inheriting money, for doing absolutely nothing. I do think that there has to be a risk reward kind of scenario where you have to go out, put some production into society and get rewarded. On the other hand, there are a lot of tempting arguments about, if everybody has a basic minimum income, if they have talents that kind of lie outside of, anything that makes profit, maybe they're artists or whatever, they can put out their products. And, I am kind of sympathetic to that, art and song and philosophy, that, these are not necessarily always big money making things, and yet they contribute to all of us as humans as a whole. Shouldn't that be supported?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't like the idea of everybody making a minimum income. I also have an economic argument against that, but I want to see if anybody has anything to say on that first part.
Oh, which the part that you said about inheritance?
Not so much inheritance. I think what you might be referring to was, if either the state or, whoever gives out the minimum income seizes all the natural resources and distributes it, something like Alaska does. They distribute a check to every resident of Alaska every month based on their oil extraction.
Well, that just sounds like almost like a type of welfare.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me too, prima facie.
Mm-hmm.
That might happen too in some of these smaller oil-rich nations in the Middle East. Like, I'm not certain if they do that or not, but I think I've heard something about that because they do have all this oil revenue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
That's pretty much.
one problem.
Although,
with,
you know what
I
I
was
saw?
going to say,
is that you've got this huge disincentive to work, because if you're, let's say you're on welfare, you're getting, $700 a month or whatever. So you don't get that money if you get a job, right? You get the money from the job, but now you have to give up your time and you have to work. So there is sort of an economic disincentive
Exactly.
that might not exist under this guaranteed minimum income scheme, or it might. I guess it all depends on the implementation, right?
Well, a lot of the ideas I've heard just guarantee to use your example, the $700 to everybody, regardless of whether they work or not.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either try and live on that $700 a month and do nothing, or work and, enhance your life through the surplus of that. I guess I'll get into my economic argument against that is, if you give everybody, including the poor, $700 a month, again, to use your arbitrary number, because, I don't think anybody's put out a set number, but if you give everybody that same amount of money, what's to say that the poor, who are usually going to use a lot of that money to buy really basic stuff, clothes, food, etc., what's to say that there's not going to be a lot of inflation in those goods when they start buying more of those, which might negate some of the benefit of that basic income.
Well, that's the debate about minimum wage in general. You're like, oh, you raise the minimum wage? Well, then that just means that prices are going to go up to meet the ability to pay everyone.
Yeah. And as far as minimum wage goes, a lot of the places that have raised the minimum wage are, out west, Seattle, out in California, certain areas.
And they're expensive to live.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to attract anybody if you're really below that $15, area. Anyway, I'll tell you, I grew up in California. I moved away from there 11 years ago. When I moved away 11 years ago, if either of you guys are familiar with In-N-Out Burger, they were already paying as a base wage $14 an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, they already paid well above the minimum wage on their own.
Yeah, exactly. Because their business model was really, we want really, really friendly people working at the counter. We want people who really know how to cook the burgers, really know how to cook the fries. They wanted to pluck some people who, might be able to work at any fast food joint, but work there, do it right, and raise the wage. And, they knew they had to raise the wage to attract the people that they wanted. And that's their core business model. Now that I live in Texas, they recently moved into Texas about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I go to In-N-Out anytime I can because their burgers are friggin' good. And it has nothing to do with how much they pay their workers. Their products are good. When your products are good, people will come. And if your products are good, you need to hire good workers and pay them more. That's all there is to it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
We don't have In-N-Out Burger in Canada. It hasn't migrated north yet, that I know of anyway. Maybe
it's mostly just on the west coast of the United States.
Yeah, it's California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico. I don't know if New Mexico has them. Texas does.
But
they're up in Utah. Yeah, definitely in the Southwest.
In Canada, isn't there this big popular burger place that's only in Canada? What's it called?
Tim Hortons?
Yeah.
I like their grilled cheese. Tim Hortons grilled cheese is awesome.
I didn't know they had grilled cheese.
Oh yeah, they got grilled cheese. They use good cheese and they use good bread. That's all there is to it. It's good. It's delicious. My wife likes the Tim Hortons hot chocolate. Not as much in favor, but the grilled cheese, keep on keeping on.
So there's another story in Canada recently where the police in Montreal were spying on a journalist, and the journalist himself was not accused of any crime. They were trying to get, the police were trying to get some information about somebody he was talking to, or they were investigating something else. And they even went as far as to track this journalist's movement in real time through his cell phone. So they had the GPS information, and they were spying on him. They were keeping tabs on him, and he was very offended. Felt that this was a violation of freedom of the press, right? You know, journalists have to be free to go around and talk to people, you know, not to reveal their sources, right? Because it's important to get the story out that there is anonymity, that they can have a blind source. And especially in the wake of the Snowden revelations from a few years ago, you know, the confirmation that yes, the government is spying on people. Where do we draw the line between the state's interest in solving crimes, in bringing criminals to justice, and the rights of the individual to privacy, and the importance of a free press?
I think Andrew Napolitano's answered this. I think it's pretty much what you can physically, without like intruding on someone's property, is what can be, I believe, is how you can do it. Because I mean, they can track anyone's phone, like the GPS. That's really, and you can't even turn it off. So it's really getting scary now. Because yeah, they shouldn't be able to use that information unless they get it by an actual legitimate means.
Boy, I don't know what the Constitution of Canada is made up of, but when I look at the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, you know, we're supposed to be secure in our papers. And of course, they didn't have cell phones back then, but papers is very, very easily, as you know, our data. And
you could say digital papers, yeah. It's like,
yeah, exactly. That's your information. You know, I think it's very troubling when a government thinks it can just wantonly track somebody's cell phone, the data that comes off of it, or ask to access an encrypted phone. You know, look at the FBI versus iPhone thing. Honestly,
you get a warrant, I think, is what it's saying.
Yeah, you can get a warrant, but you know, in the case of the FBI versus iPhone, there was nobody to execute the warrant on because the owner of the iPhone was dead. And so the FBI was trying to force Apple to create a backdoor into it. And Apple said, absolutely not. We don't have a backdoor to it. That's the whole point. And the FBI wanted to force Apple to create a backdoor so that the government could, you know, with or without warrant, get into these phones. You know, not only do we have the problem with that of, you know, worrying about, oh, how is the government going to exploit that? But then if you have a backdoor, you declare an open pathway for hackers to try and get into iPhones. And big things about iPhone is privacy. You know, that's a big thing. And you know, if we're going to talk about privacy, one of my favorite quotes about privacy is that, you know, those who would sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither liberty nor security. And that's something that's my overarching principle on that.
Yeah, and if they can do it with one cell phone, then they can do it with all of them. And that's the big issue there. Is like, oh, it's not just this one that we're worried about, because now you've opened the door for everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another problem about privacy is that it's not something that has a whole lot of money behind it in terms of, interests who are going to promote it. There's not a whole lot of lobbyists who are going to advocate for privacy. So since there's not a whole lot of interests which are interested in promoting privacy, I think we need to exploit our ability to privacy. And ability to something, I think, in some ways kind of supersedes our right to it. If you have an ability to privacy, if you have the ability to encrypt your emails, text messages, any other data that passes through or is on your phone, I think it's on you to go ahead and take advantage of that. And I would encourage that of anybody. And I'm a bit of a Luddite. I don't know about this stuff. I would actually love to know more about this stuff, but anybody who takes advantage of those things is definitely well within their rights to, and definitely should be doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a brave new world we're living in. Well,
Nice.
I guess that covers everything today. I want to thank you guys for joining me on this discussion, and it's good to get the Americans' perspective, especially on Donald Trump and everything.
Although it would have been cool to have someone who completely disagreed with all of us.
That was my hope. I really wanted to get a, I don't know, a Hillary Clinton supporter on or something, if they exist anywhere. But some progressive.
Hey, Donald Trump is a New Yorker, not an American.
The problem is there's no conflict here. Everybody's just too much in agreement. You gotta have the drama, the name calling, and talking over each other.
Yeah.
I don't like the name calling. I think that's uncalled for. We can disagree without being uncivil.
That's a very Canadian attitude.
That's how Trump got popular.